pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll with planet. Flight downside, speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
And a very good early morning here from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Chris Gebhardt, Associate Managing Editor for NASASpaceflight.com. And chat, let me know if you can hear me okay, as we are here waiting for the launch of the Falcon 9 rocket, which should come about 49 minutes from now at 1:12 Eastern Time here in the United States, 5:12 UTC. This will, of course, be the fourth time that we attempt to launch this particular Starlink mission, which has had a very protracted launch campaign dating all the way back to the end of June. This particular mission will be flying to space aboard Falcon 9 booster 1051, which has flown 4 times previously, making its 5th flight today. Among its credits include the launch of the Demo 1 uncrewed test flight of Dragon up to the International Space Station in March 2019, the Summer RadarSat constellation mission for the Canadian Space Agency in 2019, and then the 3rd and 6th operational Starlink launches earlier this year. This is the first booster of SpaceX's that launched from all 3 of the company's launch sites, and we'll be attempting another landing on the, of course, I Still Love You drone ship, which is stationed about 630 kilometers northeast of the Kennedy Space Center, waiting to catch the booster. So if you have any questions for us today about Starlink, about Falcon 9, about space, about Starlink, about BlackSky, there are 2 BlackSky satellites on this mission, in addition to the 57 Starlink internet satellites that are going up, as well, tucked safely inside of that payload fairing. But if you've got any questions, go ahead and throw them up in chat. It helps if you tag at NASA Spaceflight in that. It does help us see them a little clearer. But please ask any of your questions that you have for today. As we wait for some questions to roll in, I just wanted to take a moment to thank Michael Baylor and John Galloway, my production team behind the scenes, who are going to be feeding me those questions and are doing an absolutely fantastic job of producing the live stream. You know, I have the camera here at the Kennedy Space Center with me, but it's all the behind the scenes magic from Michael and from John that make this all work. So huge shout out and thank you to them behind the scenes. But until we roll with our first question here, and Michael, you know, when we get them, just go ahead and let me know. But as we wait for this, one thing that we are anticipating, this is the 5th flight of this particular booster. It will be making its 4th attempted landing. The drone ship is located off the coast of South Carolina. Off Charleston, South Carolina, waiting in the Atlantic Ocean to catch the booster. And the fairing catcher ships Go Mystery and Go Mischief are waiting about 100 kilometers northeast of that in order to retrieve the payload fairings. As right before we went on air, I had not seen yet if they were attempting to catch the payload fairings or if they were going to just let them splash down into the water. But the recovery ships are out there to fish them out. Of note, too, tomorrow is the earliest possible day that Crew Dragon Endeavour could return to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Here, currently aboard the Go Navigator, they have rounded the southern part of Florida and are headed up the East Coast back toward Port Canaveral. So we will be waiting for that arrival as early as tomorrow as well. But until then, we have a Starlink mission to get off the ground. And if it seems like it's been a week filled with SpaceX stuff, it really has, right? I mean, SpaceX has had an absolutely incredible week so far. They successfully returned humans to Earth on their first human spaceflight mission when the Dragon Endeavour landed in the Gulf of Mexico safely on Sunday afternoon to conclude the Demo 2 mission and the start of the commercial crew program and the crew flight operations there. They followed that a few days later by a stunningly successful test flight of Starship SN5 from Boca Chica. For those of you who are watching that live stream, we want to give a shout out to Mary for the absolutely epic job of bringing that absolutely historic test to us. And I understand that there was a stream that I wasn't able to see because I was getting ready for this, but I understand Mary did a sunset stream and a kind of like a tour. Was it, Michael? Like a
Yep.
tour of Starship?
We watched Starship at the landing pad while the sun set. It was pretty cool. And Mary was able to zoom in on landing legs and a couple other areas of interest, and we got some nice close-up views. Well, there was literally no one working out there tonight, so that was interesting. Just a super
Ah,
quiet pad. It was just Mary at the side of the road and a Starship all to herself, basically.
wow. That sounds like a dream. Like a dream come true.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah,
do you want some
well deserved.
questions?
Yeah, if we've got some questions, let's start
We've got a
taking
lot of
them.
questions already.
All right,
First
let's
of
dive
all,
in.
Rough Riders, via super chat. Chris, what places are still open to view SpaceX launches?
That's a great question. So in general, a lot of the riverfront parks here in Titusville are still open. The local authorities are just asking you to wear a mask and to social distance while you are there. Jetty Park down in Port Canaveral is also open to limited capacity to ensure that social distancing can occur as recommended by the CDC. The only site that I know of that I don't believe has reopened from the pandemic is Playa Linda Beach. But every other place seems to have either reopened with limited capacity or are just really encouraging social distancing. The tricky part, though, is that some of those parks do close in the overnight hours and don't reopen. So it's always a good idea if you're coming out for a night launch, especially if it's in the middle of the night, like not just after sundown but like right now at 1:12 in the morning, it's always a good idea to call the parks ahead of time and just make sure that they're still open. But for the most part, everything but Playa Linda has reopened at this point down here.
Yep. And then Jared asked, thank you for the super chat, Jared. What was the problem with the booster that delayed it so much?
Yeah, so this one has run into a couple of technical delays and a couple of weather delays. I don't believe SpaceX has ever really said what the particular issues were with the missions. There is one that we can infer with a pretty good degree of accuracy, and that is the last time this mission was delayed in late July in favor of letting the Anasis 2 mission launch instead. And we know on the Anasis flight, they said that there were concerns with the second stage. So it's not that big of a leap to say that what they saw on the second stage in some way impacted this particular mission. And of course, Starlink missions being internal to SpaceX always go around the paying customers. But SpaceX has not been specific on exactly what it has been with this particular rocket that
Yeah.
has caused the sequence of delays.
And people also seem to think every time the delay happens, it means something's wrong with the rocket. The Starlink spacecrafts are also very technically complex, so it could very well be there's a problem with the Starlink spacecraft that caused the delay.
As well, and as well too, that's a great point. And as well, the ground support equipment
Yeah.
is very complex at the launch pads here. So it's also possible that it was something on the ground and not the vehicle itself.
But along the lines of the delay, Dougal was asking, did they need to do another static fire prior to this launch, given the long delay?
It's a good question, and the answer is actually no. The original static fire from back, I believe it was around the 26th of June, is still valid for this particular rocket, and they did not need to redo it with the delays.
Cool. And let's see, what's the most flown SpaceX booster?
Well, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe there are two that have already flown for the fifth time, and this one will be the third one to make its fifth flight, and that is the current record.
Yes, so this will be
Yes.
a record-tying launch of a Falcon 9 booster.
And of
And
course, given their fleet, though, the first time one of these things flies 6 times should be fairly soon, just given what we know of their inventory and their launch manifest that's coming up.
yes, in fact, I believe the next Starlink launch pretty much has to be a sixth flight, given just
That
given just the process of elimination based on boosters available. So
that's what I was
um,
thinking too. Yeah, good
I'm
to hear we're on the same
trying.
wavelength there.
I'm checking quickly because to see if I can remember which booster it has to be, but it's
They seem to be in a fairly
B1049 will be making
B1049.
its sixth flight on Starlink V1, L10, or the 11th Starlink mission. So, whichever terminology you want, the next Starlink after this will be the sixth flight of a booster.
There we
So,
go.
and this will be the second Falcon 9 to fly for the fifth time.
The second. Okay.
Yes. There's
Not the
four...
fifth. I thought we had one that went. The first fifth reflight I thought was the one that didn't land successfully, and then the second fifth reflight I thought did land successfully.
Oh, you're right. Yes, you're correct. I
Okay,
was
so
filtering on my own database based on active boosters to get the answer to the next one, and I forgot that the one that had also flown 5 times got lost. So you're correct. So two Falcon 9s have flown 5 times so far. This will become the third, and the next one we'll see Falcon 9 attempt a sixth flight. So lots of reuse milestones happening.
Which is awesome, and I know Elon has kind of said, and so has Gwen, that these reuse milestones, we're going to see them all on Starlink missions at this point, basically. It would be odd to see a reuse milestone occur on another one just based on the boosters that they have and the manifest that they're trying to fly out for the rest of the year.
Will these Starlink satellites have sun shields to reduce visibility?
Great question. Yes, this is one of the absolutely fascinating parts of this mission. So all 57 Starlinks on this particular mission have the sunshade. So this is the first complete batch that is going up with that sunshade, which is it's hoped that sunshade, and from a test that they've done earlier, it's really hoped that that the sunshade will basically make them invisible to the naked eye and invisible to astrophotography, while not altering the way that the satellites work or potentially overheating them, which was a problem that came up when they painted the test one darker, and then we never really heard anything about that. Is painting it darker didn't do a lot for its ability to radiate heat and reflect heat, actually not radiate, but reflect heat away from it based on the way that they're painted. So it's hoped that these sun shields will make them invisible to the naked eye and make them invisible to astrophotography as well. But yes, all 57 of them have it on this one.
Yes, and just if you're just joining us, an update on the mission status. We're currently at T-minus 36 minutes, so in the last couple of minutes, the launch director should have verified that they're go for launch. I see that SpaceX just went live with their mission control audio stream, so I am working to pipe that in, so when there's an update, we will hear it. And
Perfect. And for those of you who, as a good reminder here, SpaceX countdowns are very, very quiet. So when we don't hear a lot over their countdown nets, that's a very, very good thing. We want it to be very, we want it to be very quiet, because quiet is good in a SpaceX count, whereas being very talkative is good for other people's countdowns.
Yep. So in about 40 seconds, we expect the propellant loading sequence to begin at T-minus 35 minutes, and hopefully, I just plugged in the audio, so hopefully we will get a call out.
In the need of an urgent abort, operator shall call hold
and here's the
hold
briefing.
On the primary countdown net, countdown 1. Launch control will abort the auto sequence immediately. An operator shall proceed to the launch abort steps in 1.160. Otherwise, brief the CE or LD for non-urgent no-go conditions, and they will approve aborting the auto sequence.
And there we go. And that is a very standard briefing that that we hear, at least over the audio nets, every single mission. So nothing to worry about. It doesn't mean there's a problem. It's just the standard way they brief the teams on what to do if something does pop up that's unexpected. And every once in a while, we do see that they need that. Okay, and launch auto sequence has started. That is their way of saying it's T-minus 35 minutes and counting. Falcon 9 has taken control of the countdown, and fueling has begun. So at this point, RP1 kerosene and densified liquid oxygen are flowing into the first stage of Falcon 9, and RP1 kerosene only is flowing into the second stage. So in the Falcon 9's case, in its Block 5 configuration, which is what we have on the pad right now today, it's the you get maximum efficiency out of the rocket by loading both propellant commodities together at the same time onto the first stage and loading them one at a time, starting with RP1 kerosene into the second stage. So that loading of RP1 kerosene will go until the T-minus 17-minute mark. Then there'll be about a minute of changeover activities, and then densified liquid oxygen will begin flowing into the second stage shortly thereafter.
Cool.
But
and go ahead.
yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, and as we wait, we can have more questions. Yeah.
Couple of super chats. Moldy Space Industries, always around to support the stream. Good morning / night, everyone. Thanks for bringing these in-person streams. I've grown to prefer the NSS streams over SpaceX ones as of late. Well, thank you for that compliment. Yeah, there's definitely the value we tried to add as we tried to be able to answer your questions in real time, because obviously SpaceX is not able to answer every single question for obvious reasons. So,
Right.
and James, wow, James Spalding, $100 super chat. I'm super
Oh my
busy right
gosh.
now. Missed the last few lives. Sorry guys. Thanks to y'all and Mary. Well, we really appreciate that, James. You did not have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
And then Brendan, you guys, space supporters and influencers are probably even more important to this new space age than any engineer. Well, I don't know about that, but thank you for the compliment.
Well, thank you.
And then High River Racer, 6 Canadian, we appreciate the support. And finally, Stace, perfect timing for me to fall asleep to your sciencey voices. I will not fall asleep before Falcon launches. One question. What is the specific impulse of the full flow Raptor engine? And I do not know that answer off the top of my head, I must admit.
I got it for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't either. That's a good question, though.
No.
I think DOS had it controlled. Go ahead, DOS.
Yeah. So Elon sent a tweet a while back saying that they were shooting for a specific impulse of 382 seconds on the Raptor. But we don't know if that's what has actually been accomplished or sustained. But his target was 382.
There you go. 382 is the target.
There you go.
Yeah. That's awesome. And you know, for engines, if that's the target, you know, or that it obviously is the stated target, so it wouldn't be uncommon for the early version of those engines to probably not be quite there yet, but very close as they continue to mature the engine and the overall design. And to be fair, like, we've seen the Raptors come a very, very long way in a very short amount of time. And we know they're firing them almost daily out at McGregor at their test site in Texas. So lots of development still coming with those babies.
Yeah, and that was vacuum as well. That was vacuum, not sea level, atmospheric.
Gotcha. So then the one we saw fly on Raptor definitely wasn't that, but
exactly.
But yeah.
A comment from Jonathan McDowell, who obviously is a very good expert on topics like the ones he's commenting on in his comment. Jonathan says, visors will make them not naked eye, but won't be faint enough to save astronomy with decent sized telescopes. So I guess the visors will help. You know, it'll be harder to see them with the naked eye, but there's still going to be affecting astronomy, is what he's saying there. So
okay, gotcha. And yes, and as you said, Michael, you know, there we go. Take what Jonathan said as gospel on that one.
That's a primary source.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Jonathan's Twitter just so I can read you the exact title he gives himself so I don't botch it. But he says, I'm an astronomer at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Excuse me, I cannot talk tonight. Working on Chandra and quasars. So, yes, I think we're going to go with Jonathan.
Indeed. And we can actually see a little bit of frosty venting there from about a fourth of the way up the Falcon 9. You can see gaseous oxygen beginning to vent from the transporter erector, and vapor starting to come off the Falcon 9 itself as fuel is definitely being pumped into it at this point. We are at this point 30 minutes away from our scheduled liftoff at 1:12 a.m. Eastern Time, 5:12 UTC.
Yep, and I am just boosting DOS audio. A couple people were saying it was quiet, so it should be fixed now. Another question, will there be polar launches for later Starlink missions, or is that just not worth it?
So the orbits that they have actually asked for, I mean, unless they have changed it very, very recently, are all what would be considered non-polar, basically mid to high inclination orbits, but not polar. So basically, what they're doing now is what they've asked for so far. And to not be completely coy and and completely uninformative there. What I mean by what they're doing now is going into the 55, 53 degree inclination orbits that the previous Starlink missions have been launched into. Which would be a high inclination orbit in that case at that range.
And Danny, our Starlink expert, is typing. I'm just waiting to see what he says.
Yes.
So it's okay. It sounds like in the most recent filings, they are looking to eventually add polar orbits greater than 80 degrees inclination. So that'd be like a future constellation improvement. But the initial constellation, like Chris said, is 55 degrees.
Yeah.
So
and polar could open up some interesting choices, because they could opt to do those polar launches from here to consolidate all Starlink operations to the Florida launch site. And they still have Vandenberg, but with the opening of the polar launch corridor in Florida, for which SAOCOM 1B, which is a mission coming up later this year from SpaceX, a little bit of a question as to whether or not it's going to be later this month or further into September or later, based on some Federal Communication Commission extension filings for the communication frequencies for that particular mission. But that will be the first one to actually do a polar orbit from Florida in 60 years. And so that does open up some possibilities as to where they could go from, and doesn't necessarily mean that Vandenberg will get those missions.
Yeah, and I think the next Vandenberg mission is going to be Sentinel-6. That's going to be a NASA mission, and according to the most recent NASA manifest, it is still under review. It's been scheduled for first half of November for a while, and it's constantly been under review. So I'm guessing it's going to slip, but it's a question of how much. But SpaceX has not launched from Vandenberg since May of last year, and that was the RadarSat constellation mission, which was launched by the very booster you're looking at right now. So.
There we go. Good symmetry. Good synergy, yeah.
More questions. What happens to the second stage after it's done deploying the satellites?
Yeah, so in this case, it's about an hour and a half after liftoff that all of the satellites will finally be separated. The two BlackSky satellites will separate will separate about an hour and a minute, an hour and 6 minutes after liftoff, and then the Starlinks will separate 90 minutes or so after liftoff, roughly. And then the second stage after that will do a deorbit burn and come back in for a destructive reentry, so that it does not stay up there creating potential debris hazards for other satellites in orbit.
Yep. Sathai, thank you for the super chat. Ben, also thank you for the super chat. Yes, 2 live streams. We do a lot of live streams these days. And then another super chat. Any word on the flames that appeared on Raptor during the hop test? I don't think there's been anything official on that.
No, nothing that I've seen, aside from the video that they released that did show some flames on it, but I don't remember or have a memory of seeing anything from anyone official about that.
Yep. If you're just joining us, we're now at T-minus 25 minutes. And they just called out helium load onto net, if I heard that correct. So
yes, indeed. So they are progressing very nicely at this point. Because we should, about 25 minutes prior to liftoff, right on schedule. So in about 5 minutes, we will have our big T-minus 20-minute vent of gaseous oxygen, which is a good visual indicator that everything is on track and that we are at the T-minus 20-minute mark. You know, we've, on all of our Starship streams, if you've been watching those, I think from that the team really had it down to as much of a science as we could based on the visual cues of what the vehicle is doing at different parts the countdown. And of course, we know really to look for that in SpaceX vehicles because of the Falcon 9, because we get a big vent of gaseous oxygen at T-minus 20 minutes, and then we get another vent around 2.5 minutes prior to launch. And those are sort of our two big visual cues for the Falcon 9 that I know we, what is it called? DOS, Texas Tank Watchers, that like the Texas Tank Watcher squad has been able to put together through the multiple campaigns for Starship. So it is kind of cool that these rockets give us visual cues of where they are in their countdowns.
Certainly. Light for Japan Productions. We do not know if they're going to attempt to catch the fairings yet. Hopefully, SpaceX often comments on that at the start of the webcast. So if they say what they're going to do, we will let you know. And then Evan's wondering, do the drone ships have hydraulic landing legs or landing decks to make them as level as possible during booster landing at sea?
That's a good question. No, they do not. So whatever the sea states are what the Falcon 9 has to contend with as it comes down onto the drone ship. There are limits. There are weather constraints to landings. And we have actually seen SpaceX scrub Starlink missions because weather at the landing site was not acceptable for the boosters, and getting the boosters back after Starlink missions, when it's an internal mission, you can delay all you want in order to get them back. Nope, they've got to contend with it. And in fact, SpaceX has released some absolutely epic videos of one of the boosters when it did its landing in really rough seas and successfully landed, but doing its dance and its hop and its wobble around the deck after landing. So nope, they just have to contend with whatever the sea states are out there.
Why is there a time gap between final SECO and payload deploy for most/all missions?
Yes, so this is a good question. So after rockets, so rockets can either ascend to orbit in one of two ways. They can either do a burn to their desired orbit, which, for example, like we see the Falcon 9 do that when it launches crew up to the International Space Station. And then sometimes the weight of the payloads, the trajectory that the rocket has to fly, and how it has to get to its specific orbit mandates reigniting the second stage a few minutes after, like 30 minutes or 45 minutes or so after liftoff, when it's roughly on the other side of the world. And that burn is primarily done to raise the perigee, the point of closest approach to Earth's surface of the atmosphere. And then after that burn is complete, what really dictates the separation times of the satellites is, one, it can be specifically where they need to go. But more than likely, it also has to do with the fact that sometimes you want them over ground stations, over ground tracking stations, so that when they release from the top of the rocket, you can instantly start gathering data and talking to that satellite. So for example, deploying about 35 minutes after liftoff today, based on the orbit that they're going into, would basically put them within range of the Boca Chica tracking site in Texas when Starlinks pop off. So a variety of things, but a lot of times when we see these prolonged waits between final burns and separations, it's just because of where they want them to be physically over the ground when they separate.
Yep, and I'm going to put up the mission timeline for today's mission. It's actually kind of interesting.
All right, and stage 2 fuel load is complete, and we can see our big T-minus 20-minute vent coming from the transporter erector now. You can see big white billowy clouds coming from the Falcon 9 on the launch pad. That is exactly what we want to see at this point in our countdown for the launch of the 9th operational Starlink flight, 10th batch of Starlinks overall, 57 Starlinks on this, all with sunshades to help reduce their visibility in orbit. And 2 BlackSky Earth observation satellites also hitching a ride on this particular mission today.
Yes, I was going to show a timeline, but I remembered the you reminded me of the T-20 event, so we will watch this first.
Ah, yes. And I'm just checking out of curiosity because I wanted to kind of watch this myself on my phone. I don't see the SpaceX webcast itself yet. Is that correct, Michael?
No, and
Only mission audio.
Once it is live, we will hook it up to our broadcast. So we'll get Chris G's view, we'll get the SpaceX webcast view, and we will watch this thing all the way through landing. Are we going to stick around for spacecraft separation, Chris?
We are not tonight, just because of how long after liftoff it is. We have to leave the grounds of Kennedy Space Center prior to spacecraft separation, so we will be with you up until a successful arrival on orbit. I at least also won't be able to stay for the second burn, either, just because of how security is working here this evening in the overnight hours. So we'll be with you until they get into their initial orbit, and a little bit after that, but probably about 15 minutes after liftoff is when we'll have to wrap it up. At least from my perspective and my point of view here.
Yeah, 15 minutes after liftoff. Sorry, I was reading something else.
Yes, 15 minutes after liftoff.
Cool.
Yeah.
I will keep track of that then. And if something like exciting is happening during that time, I can hold the stream down for a couple of minutes too.
Yeah.
Wow, it looks like the wind is super light today.
It really is. There's no breeze. There's absolutely no breeze here right now. So yeah, that is just literally hanging in the atmosphere around the Falcon 9 and around the pad. It looks epic on the camera, and it looks epic in person too, especially with the new LED, like the LEDs instead of the xenon lights that are out there now that light up our pads. I mean, it just looks awesome today. Like, but how did Bob Bankin describe Dragon coming back in? Like, it sounded like an animal. And yes, exactly. And people always describe, like, the teams that get to go out to the launch pads, like the red team and the closeout team and the blue team. Just various names for the same thing. Like, the people who go out to the pad after a rocket is fully fueled to either do inspections or put a crew on board, always describe them as sounding alive. Like they're creaking and they're getting ready and they're making sounds like they're a living entity once fuel starts flowing into them. So it was also cool to hear Bob make that connection to Dragon and its reentry process. Yeah. So any more questions that we got?
How much difference is there between JRTI and, of course, I Still Love You? JRTI seems to keep live streams during landings and continue uninterrupted much better.
Yes. Yes, the only thing I will add to that is their name is obviously different as the sarcastic, jokey answer. I think the other big difference is Just Read the Instructions has received...
Stage 2 lock load has started.
There we go. So T-minus 16 minutes and counting here as we head into liquid oxygen loading on the second stage. So RP1 kerosene loading onto the second stage is closed out and in stable replenish at this point. Stable replenish just meaning they're pumping just as much in that kind of boils off and just to maintain the flight, the needed levels and the full status for flight. But yes, Just Read the Instructions has also received some other upgrades. We know it underwent a huge overhaul last year after it made it through the Panama Canal when it was being transferred from the West Coast to the East Coast. We know it has new thrusters on board. We know it has, just a lot of upgrades that they are eventually planning to make to, of course, I Still Love You as well, which is part of the benefit of having two drone ships. They just kind of need a period of time to work on that, either between missions for, of course, I Still Love You, or a prolonged period of time where they know they can just use Just Read the Instructions in order to take, of course, I Still Love You out of service. But again, they could also just do it in between its various missions. But that is, but that's the main difference between them right now.
Do you think SpaceX will do 100% rideshare missions, or just keep continuing to put them on Starlink? So I guess the question is, will SpaceX do dedicated rideshare missions where every rideshare payload, where the entire mission is rideshare payloads, or will they just do rideshares on Starlink missions?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer to it is yes, they will do dedicated rideshare missions. They are called, what are they called, Michael? The SSO missions is what they're called.
I don't
SpaceX.
think they've given them an official name yet. I think
Okay,
SSO is the name the community has given them, but
gotcha, gotcha. But yeah, SpaceX plans to offer at least one dedicated rideshare mission a year into a polar orbit from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, is the plan that was announced. They've also said that they have over 100 spacecraft already signed up to launch on multiple dedicated rideshare missions. And this offer for dedicated rideshares is actually looking really, really profitable for SpaceX, and a good move on their part. We saw immediately after they announced that a bunch of other companies announced dedicated rideshares as well. And not everyone is like BlackSky and Planet Labs, the two that are doing the ride shares on these Starlink missions. But Planet Labs and BlackSky work on Starlink missions because they're trying to get to basically the same inclination orbits as the Starlinks are going into, or close enough, so it's advantageous for them to hitch rides on the Starlinks. Where for other small satellites, it's more advantageous to go on dedicated rideshare missions into orbits that the customers of those small satellites actually have a little bit more control over. Because on these missions for Starlink, BlackSky and Planet Labs, they just have to go to the same orbit that the Starlinks are going to. They don't have another choice in terms of orbital inclination. But it works for them in this case, which is why we see the rideshare on the previous one, we see the rideshare now, and we know that Planet has 3 more on the next Starlink, which will go later this month if the current schedule holds.
when is the next predicted Falcon Heavy launch?
I believe that is next year at this point. This is the Air Force, now Space Force one, and I believe that has moved into early next year at this point.
Yes, U.S. Space Force 44, which I think the last official word was December, but I don't think December is happening because SpaceX would have to be putting those boosters off of the production line pretty soon, and we haven't seen that happen.
Exactly.
How
But
far?
which does raise an interesting question because of the manifest that we know that they have here, right? In terms of the manifest of the available Falcon 9s, Falcon 9 first stages. What is absolutely fascinating is that there are 2 that they're just not using that are here. And those are the 2 side cores that launched the Arabsat 6A and STP-2 Falcon Heavy missions in April and June of 2019. And we know those are here at the Cape, and we know SpaceX has said it's relatively easy to reconfigure those from side cores into generic Falcon 9s by just removing their nose cones and putting an interstage on top of them as well. But we have not seen them actually do that, which to me would indicate that even though they've lost a couple of boosters here, there was one that failed to land because of upper level winds that blew it too far, of course. And then there was the first 5th reflight, which encountered an engine issue during ascent and was unable to successfully land as well. And a lot of us thought, oh, well, they've got 2 others. We'll probably see them pull that to maintain the manifest. And they haven't done that. So that's kind of an indication that they don't necessarily need to reconfigure those side cores, at least yet, based on the number of available boosters they have. And of course, the number of available boosters went up with the successful demo 2 launch and landing, and the successful return of Anasis, and the successful launch and landing of the booster that launched the GPS-3 satellite at the end of June. So the more flights they do for paying customers, the more boosters they end up getting in the arsenal for reflights. But it is interesting that we haven't seen them reconfigure those Falcon Heavy side cores yet.
Hunter asks, how far away is your tracking camera from the pad? And while Christy answers the number for how far we are, I will put up a map of where Christy is.
Yeah. So I am standing 3 miles or 5 kilometers from pad 39A at the press site at the Kennedy Space Center. I am specifically, Michael, if you look on the map, so there's where the countdown clock and flagpole is, and then there's where the Pegasus barge docks. at the turn basin, and I am basically halfway between those 2 points, looking through a little gap in the trees here crap. Hang on. I just dropped a whole bunch of stuff. I need to reconfigure. Michael, if you can take over for a second.
Yep. And if you look on the map on the right, the turn basin that Chris G was talking about is just to the left of, it's that waterway that on the right-hand side that ends up going just to the left of the red arrow. That's where the NASA's Pegasus barge will drop off parts of the SLS rockets. So that is how they get parts from Louisiana over to Florida.
It actually all the way up to the VAB right there, right? Because that's right
Yeah.
across from the VAB.
Yeah, the VAB is the big building. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see the shadow of it sort of down to the left, and it's where that long path leads to. That is where the crawlers take their mobile launch platforms up to the launch pad, or mobile launchers now with SLS.
Yes. And I'm back.
All right, welcome back, Chris. Back to you.
Yes, sorry. One thing cascaded down from the pile. Everything went down with it.
Like a modem avalanche or something.
It pretty much was. They're all fine though.
Okay, good.
They're all fine. But yes, and it'll be interesting to see too, because not just do we have the SLS mobile launcher that's in High Bay 3, right now we also have the mobile launcher that is a former Apollo and shuttle pad that is being reconfigured by Northrop Grumman for use by their Omega rocket, which will launch from 39B as well. So it is neat to see two completely different mobile launchers for two completely different systems. One using, both technically using heritage hardware, one using heritage flight hardware from Apollo and Shuttle, and one using unflown heritage hardware from the Constellation program, which would be the SLS mobile launcher, which was originally for the Ares 1 vehicle.
And just a quick update, the fairing catchers do have their nets up. So they will be attempting to catch the fairings, and that's not too surprising because the last fairing catch went very well with both fairing halves being caught for the first time. So we'll see if SpaceX can repeat that feat tonight.
Yes, indeed.
And at T-minus 7 minutes, Falcon 9 should now be beginning engine chill.
Yes, so engine chill down. So this is when they begin opening up some of the...
has started.
There you go.
There we go. This is when they start opening up some of the fuel, some of the propellant lines, specifically the oxidizer lines that hold the densified liquid oxygen in the first stage. They open those up slightly to begin trickling down that densified liquid oxygen into the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the base of the Falcon 9. And this is basically just to thermally condition them for engine ignition. So if you think about like a really hot, humid day and you're in your car and you've got the AC blasting on you and you're wearing glasses and you get out of your car, and what's the first thing your glasses do? They completely fog up, right? But if you thermally condition them to the same temperature as it is outside the car, when you then step out of the car, nothing happens because they're already at the proper temperature. And that's what they're trying to do. And that's what they're trying to do with the Merlin 1D engines. So you can hear a lot of call-outs now. We're in the business end of the countdown. RP1 kerosene load into the second stage has been closed out at this point. And I believe we are at the point where the next big visual milestone is the pre-pullback position of the TE, the transporter erector, which should come here in a couple of minutes. But until then, we've got some time for another question, Michael, if there's one in the queue.
Why did SpaceX choose a splashdown style landing for Dragon while Boeing is landing on land?
Ah, yes. So this was arguably one of the more fascinating developments that came out of the Commercial Crew Program. SpaceX's original design for Crew Dragon was a propulsive landing. So basically the capsule would come back to land on basically LZ-1 or LZ-2 here at Cape Canaveral. And it had little legs that would deploy, and it would use the Super Draco engines to slow down and come in for a nice, gentle touchdown. And NASA wasn't really happy with retro rocket propulsion landings at the time. Remember, this was long before the Falcon 9 successfully started nailing all of their landings, or at least most of their landings. And NASA actually asked them to go back and consider parachute landings. And the design of the vehicle had basically matured enough to the point where they couldn't redesign it without significant hits to its performance or its cargo or crew capabilities for a land landing under parachutes, but it was easier to reconfigure it. But it was easier to reconfigure it for water landing. So that is why Dragon splashes down under parachute and Starliner lands under parachute and airbag deployment out in one of several locations out in the American West. And at this point, we are about 3.5 minutes away from liftoff of the Falcon 9 here.
Yes.
So yes, so this is awesome. I'm also trying to do a streak shot here and time all of this correctly. So Michael,
yep, I
yes,
got it.
Yeah.
Jala, thank you for the 10 Australian dollars. They say they're here, and they are a big supporter of the stream. I've seen that name before, so thank you. Quickly, a slightly off-topic question from Ken, but we still have some time here. So, will SpaceX scrap SN5? It sounds like it might be reflying, although nothing too official on that yet. But with Elon saying he wants to fly several small hops, it seems quite likely that it could be flying. And I think if I heard that call out correctly, it was kind of quiet. But
strong back
retract, yes.
That would match what I just saw happen out at the pad, so yes.
So that strong back has now retracted a couple of degrees, and of course at launch it will retract quite a bit further. And stage 1 LOX load complete was the other call out we just heard.
Which is awesome, which means in a couple of minutes, Falcon 9 will be completely closed out and ready for flight, and then we will begin to hear the call-outs for the vehicle being in startup. One thing to mention, SpaceX's feed is sometimes about 15 to 30 seconds delayed from real time. That's not us transmitting it late to you. That's actually just live as we get the feed from them. It's a little bit late. So just bear in mind that during the liftoff, you might see things happen like liftoff several seconds before you hear them actually say liftoff. So just be ready for that. But we are under 2 minutes to go now until this particular launch. Again, if you are just joining us, I'm Chris Gebhardt. I'm the Assistant Managing Editor of NASA Spaceflight. And we are here at the Kennedy Space Center live. This is my camera that I've got that we'll be using to track the launch of Falcon 9 with 57 Starlink satellites and 2 BlackSky satellites on board this particular vehicle. Liftoff is timed for just over 1 minute from now.
And Chris, at T-1 minute 20 seconds, are the camera settings ready to go?
Camera settings are ready, DOS, yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we will be transitioning Chris onto his camera audio at this time. I'm going to mute his Discord, which is the backend system we're using to communicate, and I will bring up his ambient high-quality microphone. So Chris, with under a minute to launch, take it away.
All right, so if we hear Falcon 9 is in startup again, the callouts are a little bit, sorry, the commentary is a little bit delayed here, but you should get but this should be an absolutely gorgeous launch with a nearly full moon over us.
And you're not getting the count on that right now. It's a minor issue, but T-minus 20 seconds.
Stage 1, 2.
All right, here we go.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8.
All right, here we go. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 on the 10th flight of Starlink satellites into orbit. 5th flight for this particular booster. flight as Falcon 9 heads downrange. A giant orange ball of light in the sky. Falcon 9 actually above a very, very thin cloud deck here. The camera's actually doing the best it can focusing on it, but it's actually looking through clouds at the Falcon 9. So that is all that we can see here from the Kennedy Space Center. I'm going to keep it on the Falcon 9 though, because it's a night launch, and you know what that means, folks. We could very, very, very well be graced with a Falcon 9 nebula very shortly, as the second stage ignites and continues to take those Starlink satellites up into orbit. But absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous views of the Falcon 9 as she heads downrange from Kennedy. So far, so good. Aboard the vehicle, standing by now for stage shutdown and separation, which should be coming up momentarily.
Chris, you got a great
here.
track. That's amazing.
Can still very, very clearly see it. There we go. Booster engine cutoff. Stage separation, and standing by now for stage 2 ignition and to see what we get. Stage 2 has ignited. There is stage 2. And you know what? Not seeing the nebula tonight.
And there goes the fairing.
Confirmed.
And we'll work on getting Chris G's audio back here. Michael, his audio doesn't seem to be on this scene.
Yeah.
But you can see on the right-hand side that Merlin engine on the second stage, still pushing the second stage with the payload of Starlink satellites into orbit. On the left-hand side, looks like SpaceX is sticking with another camera there, not getting a feed on the left-hand side, but that
empty launch pad.
continues to...
And Michael, if you want to go
Yep,
ahead
they are
and
watching.
over to the live audio.
Chris,
as
can you just
well,
hold on for a second? We're going to
from,
transfer your audio.
or from SpaceX, I'm sure we already have at this point, but.
Yeah, interestingly.
And Chris, you are now operating off of Discord. We're watching Falcon 9, second stage continuing to head to orbit as second stage works its, Falcon 9 second stage continue on to orbit as Falcon 9's first stage heads towards, of course, I Still Love You and the Atlantic Ocean.
Gotcha. And so far, so good. Again, as Falcon 9 continues its way downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, heading up into orbit now.
Yep. We cannot actually see what's happening on the first stage right now. It's
Both vehicles are
completely
nominal
dark.
trajectories.
But I just called out a nominal trajectory on stage 2. And of course, we can
Awesome.
see the bright Merlin engine glowing red hot.
Which is exactly, of course, what we want to see, a nice, happy, glowing Merlin engine.
Now we're looking up through the interstage on Falcon 9, first stage, as it goes, as the camera switches black to darkness, so we can see a puff or two of the nitrogen-cooled gas thrusters as they orientate the first stage down towards the entry, as they orientate the first stage to get into position for the entry burn, which is coming up in just a couple of seconds here.
All right, and of course, as wonderful as it is to watch those first stages come in and do their entry burns and their landing burns, keep your eye on the magnificently glowing Merlin 1D vacuum engine there on the right-hand side of your screen, because as great as landings are, the whole reason the mission is launching is on that second stage and totally reliant on that single Merlin 1D engine. I say that as I internally geek out over all of the thruster pulses that we're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen from the first stage. But yeah, you know, perspective. It's good to be excited, but
So entry burn should be coming up here. There it is.
There it is. Whoo, look at that. That never gets old, Michael. That never gets old.
No.
So we have 4 Merlins firing right now, right? 3 on the first
Yeah.
stage for the entry burn and the Merlin vacuum on the second stage. And there we go, entry burn complete.
Stage 1, entry burn shutdown.
Yeah. Look at that. Whew.
So now they should lose the first stage feed here momentarily as the stage falls over the horizon and away from the ground tracking stations which are used to get to downlink.
But look at how much it's heating up in the atmosphere. Even though we've slowed it down a lot, you could see those grid fins starting to glow, and there's a view from where where it's hoping to land here in just a few minutes. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see the deck of Course I Still Love You waiting to receive the first stage. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see the important part right now, the continuation of the second stage burn of the Merlin vac engine, getting Starlink, getting the 57 Starlinks and the 2 BlackSky satellites into their initial parking orbit before a short coast, before a 3-second reignition of this Merlin engine to get into the final deployment orbit today, which is higher than previous than some of the previous deployment orbits of the satellites. These are going into roughly 300 by 400 kilometer orbit, much higher than it has been seen before on Starlink missions. Stage 1 landing burn. There we go.
See that light starting to come down on the camera?
Yep, indeed.
Start internal guidance.
And camera might fritz out, but
Stage
here we
1,
go.
landing leg
Here we
deploy.
go. Landing legs are deployed. Look at that. Landed. Woo! Woo!
Well, that was a
Drone
pretty
ship
stable.
had it uninterrupted. That is awesome.
That was super
Yeah.
stable.
That was incredible stable video. Man, that puts us to shame for saying that it never happens on Of Course I Still Love You, doesn't it, Michael?
To be fair, I think there was a comment. That was not our comment.
True. True. Oh, man, but you can see the first stage successfully on Of Course I Still Love You. The second stage still successfully firing. Let's keep our... Oh, and there it goes. SECO 1, stage engine cutoff. So we're going to be quiet now and listen... Okay, so that's as we expected, to lose the signal to the second stage. Standing by for good orbit insertion call.
Nominal parking orbit insertion.
There we go. So Falcon 9's first and second stages have done 99.9% of their job today. The first stage is successfully on the drone ship. Of Course I Still Love You. A successful 5th flight for booster 1051. Which to date, now to its credit, holds the launch records or holds the launches of the Demo 1 uncrewed flight of Dragon, the Canadian Space Agency's RadarSat mission, and Starlink launches 3, 6, and 9 if you go by the version 1 launch number sequence. If you go by overall, that would be 4, 7, and 10 on the total on Starlink flights for this particular booster. Now back in the arsenal and ready to be brought back to Cape Canaveral for refurbishment and reflight again for the 6th time. The second stage is in orbit. Michael's got the timeline, the mission timeline up, so you can see we're in a short coast now. The second stage will then reignite for a very short 3-second burn that will raise the perigee up from what it is now, which is a stable orbit above Earth's atmosphere for perigee, but it will raise that perigee up to about 300 kilometers. Apogee, highest point in the orbit, is about 400 kilometers, and that's going to be our rough deployment orbit for today for this particular mission. After that reignition, though, that very short reignition, it's then another long coast until the 2 BlackSky satellites separate just after an hour into the flight, and then the 57 Starlinks will follow with a separation about just over 90 minutes after liftoff. Again, and that would put their separation actually within range of the Boca Chica tracking site. But that that was a pretty good launch. That was amazing. Nice and smooth, which is exactly what we want to see. And really goes to show that, yes, it can be frustrating when missions encounter multiple delays like this one has. It can certainly be frustrating when launches like this are delayed for over a month for various reasons. But this is why they get delayed. So that when it's actually time to launch and you've listened to your vehicle and you've listened to the payload and you've listened to the ground systems, everything works like it's supposed to. And up we go into orbit as we saw today. And of course, we are looking at DOS's favorite post-launch scene, a live look at Launch Complex 39A, nice and happy after a successful liftoff today. We've got a couple more minutes before I'm going to have to pack it up and call it a night. But do we have any other questions, Michael, or super chats that have come in since we went through them last?
Yes,
Expect
I
a
can
loss of
check
signal,
Q.
Bermuda.
Aces down, always here to support the stream with a super chat. Thank you for support. He says thanks to you all, and this one is for you, Chris G. So super chat, Chris G in the house.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's see.
I do have to say, as you're searching for another question, 1:12 in the morning is so psychologically better than 3:12 in the morning. That this just kind of seemed like, oh, I'd be up anyway, so let's go watch a rocket launch versus, oh, I have to either get up early or stay up, you know. Yeah, 1:12 is a good time. I'll take it.
Mr. Showtime asks, how heavy is the cargo?
Yeah, so I don't know if did they release the actual weight or the actual mass for this particular one, because I know when they've got 60 Starlinks on it together, it's roughly 16,000 kilograms.
I think this one's about 14,820 kilograms, the Starlink side, assuming the Starlink mass has not changed significantly since they last officially released a number.
Oh, and with the sun visors, that mass would have changed, yes.
And BlackSky should be about 55 kilograms each, so about just under 15,000 kilograms, probably a good approximate. Maybe if you include the sun visors, around 15,000 kilograms for this launch.
Which would make sense that it would be about 1,000 kilograms or so less than like a Starlink flight with 60, a full complement of 60 on them, because those tend to deploy into much lower orbits. And this one was going to a higher orbit, so it would make sense that it had a slightly lower mass. Based on, you know, we know that Falcon 9 is kind of right at its limit in order to be able to land on the drone ship when you've got a full complement of 60 Starlinks on it, and then that obviously leaves more work for the second stage to do. So the fact that the second stage was able to boost it to a much higher orbit this time would make sense that it would be a lower mass payload in this regard.
Cool. Well, at T plus 15 minutes, should we start winding things down?
I think we should indeed. It has been, thank you all for joining us. For those of you in the United States and Europe, thank you for staying up with us, and South America and portions of Africa as well. Thank you for staying up with us or getting up with us very early in the morning, depending on where you are. This type of stuff, this is exactly part of what our mission is here at NASA Spaceflight, to bring you these launches up close. And not just to bring them to you up close, but to answer your questions and engage with you and really create that sense of global community that we all share as space aficionados and spaceflight supporters and space program supporters. So thank you so much to everyone who watched. Thank you especially to everyone who is our channel member, and to everyone today who donated super chats to us. It's that type of channel membership support and super chat support that allows us to be out here with the equipment and the investment and everything that we need to bring you these launches as they happen, not just from here in Florida, but from Boca Chica as well, and from anywhere that rockets go skyward. So that's going to do it here for me. Again, really special shout out and thank you to John Galloway and Michael Baylor, our producers. John, mostly behind the scenes. Michael was the other voice you primarily heard, feeding me questions and information today. Thank you guys. You know, this stream was a really smooth and could not have been done without you. So thank you both very much.
Cool. Well, with that, I guess it's time to sign off. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. And we will leave you with our super cool video that Jack made with lots of cool spaceflight highlights.
Chamber pressure looks good. Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Water towers fly! Somebody's outside of speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.